Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Zen Honeycutt and I'm the founder and director of Moms Across America, and I'm thrilled you're with us today. We are a national coalition of unstoppable moms, and our motto is Empowered Moms, Healthy Kids. And we are committed to empowering millions to educate themselves about GMOs, genetically modified organisms in our food, and related pesticides, to get them labeled as a first step to elimination, and to offer GMO-free and organic solutions. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Zach Bush. Hi, Zach.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Yes, we're very excited to have Dr. Zach Bush on to speak about gut health issues and what we can do about it, and a little bit about why we have him on today. So first of all, I'm going to just share your bio a little bit here, talk a little bit about your bio. So Dr. Zach Bush was president of his medical school at the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center where he got his MD, and later became the chief resident for the Department of Internal Medicine at the University of Virginia. Over the last 12 years, Dr. Bush has continued to further his medical and basic science knowledge. He is among the few physicians in the nation that is triple board certified, having completed training and certification in 3 fields, including internal medicine, endocrinology and metabolism, and hospice and palliative care. He has published peer-reviewed articles and book chapters in the areas of infectious disease, endocrinology, and cancer. He uses Restore in his clinic, which is called the Revolution Health Center, and has seen clinically significant improvements in patients with leaky gut, gluten intolerance, autism, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune conditions such as Crohn's disease and irritable bowel syndrome. Now, I don't know about you moms that are out there, but those issues are all issues that I see in my family and our friends and families, and it's no longer acceptable. We have a skyrocketing health crisis in America today, and I want to talk a little bit about that. That's why we're here with you today. So let's get into this, and let's talk a little bit about, why do you say in your talks, and why does it say on your bottle, your containers, that GMOs and pesticides impact our health and our gut? Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Absolutely. Thanks for the introduction and great overview there. As a physician, and I believe as a parent these days, you can really witness this groundswell of awareness, as well as the obvious clinical disaster that we have around us in our children and in our young adults. And the disaster is one of these epidemic proportions of chronic disease, and we see that in children in the form of colic in the newborn, poor eating behavior, poor sleep patterns, to attention deficit and the sensory processing disorders in the autism spectrum. But even in those kids not affected with that severe of the sensory processing, you're already seeing very widespread anxiety disorders, asthma, allergy, food sensitivities. The list goes on and on before you even hit age 5 now. We're seeing metabolic disorder, type 2 diabetes in children under the age of 10 now, previously thought to be only a disease of the adults. So really this very rapid aging process is onsetting the entire nation, and the speed at which the diseases are rising in prevalence is startling. In children, certainly the march of autism is among the most spectacularly distressing ones. We're now seeing 1 in 45 formally diagnosed, but we think that much higher numbers than that are walking around with some variant of the spectrum disorder undiagnosed. And a lot of that's because parents see that Western medicine really doesn't have a good solution for those children that are struggling, and so they're not in a rush to go get their child labeled or anything. And it's not until they really need the resources that the label brings that they're pursuing those diagnoses. So when we see a number of 1 in 45 now formally diagnosed, we know the numbers are much more startling than that. And going into any kindergarten room now, you can see it, that there's a handful of kids in every 20 kids that are so heavily affected, they're disrupting the flow of any schoolroom. And so you're asking a question about the food industry around GMOs and herbicides and pesticides. And that's kind of accelerating us to a really exciting point of realization that, wow, maybe there's something that's literally in the water that's causing this global shift of public health as we decline. The United States is now 49th in the world for major health outcomes, including neonatal death and things like this. So our ranking at 49 is pretty grim. And it really is literally coming down to what did we put in the food and water that's really affecting this global change. The history of it dates back as far as World War II. So as we ended up the war effort, we had this huge glut of petroleum. We turned that from the war machine into the farming machine, and we created what was called the Green Health Revolution in the 1950s. And the idea was to create factory farming with this new technology of taking petroleum-based fertilizers, these nitrogen fertilizers, and dumping them on the soil to create really productive crops. And it did exactly what it said. It created a lot of green crops, and we went from farms that were a couple hundred acres to a couple thousand, then tens of thousands, and now hundreds of thousands of acres in size. And so this massive expansion of the power of a single farmer was really ignited by first an artificial soil environment, and then subsequently the plants started to be prone to disease in that artificial environment. And so we created herbicides and pesticides. And so with each passing decade, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, we've gotten more and more aggressive with our pesticide and herbicide efforts to keep in check the diseases that are so prone to attacking monocrops. And when you plant thousands of acres of corn or thousands of acres of soybean, the entire welfare of not just the farmer, but really the food industry itself is buoyed up by the more and more dependence on these artificial mechanisms of disease control. None of this is getting at a healthy plant, and ultimately none of it's getting at a healthy human when we're thinking about our food chain. And so this is kind of in the general awareness of the public. As a scientist, I didn't really understand the link between what was going on our food chain and our nutrition until we stumbled upon our discovery in 2012 when we discovered the science around the product that is now Restore. At the time, it was just these liquids we were pulling out of soil to get these carbon molecules. But it all comes down to the vulnerability of these little proteins that are in the human gut wall that are called tight junctions. And as these tight junctions are damaged by herbicides, namely glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in almost every herbicide or weed killer on the market now, glyphosate, previously under the name of Roundup, has gone generic after coming off patent in 2007, and now most of it's actually being produced in China. And so we have this huge global glut of glyphosate being dumped into our food and water systems. The EPA.
It's important to note that it doesn't wash off, and it doesn't cook off, and it doesn't dry off. And it's allowed by the EPA on 160 of our foods at residues far above which destroy our gut bacteria.
Right. So they're direct toxins to the bacteria. And secondarily, they're direct toxins to these little tight junction proteins that lace the front line of defense of your gut together. Unfortunately, it doesn't stop there, and these tight junctions are also responsible for the integrity of the blood vessel wall. And so every blood vessel in your body is tied together with these tight junctions, and perhaps most importantly for the children, the blood-brain barrier. And so this holy of holies that is supposed to be the brain, protected from all nature of both organic and inorganic compounds that may be in your bloodstream, that blood-brain barrier, same tight junctions. And so when your gut gets hit with glyphosate or an antibiotic even, or drugs like non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen, or common medications used for constipation in children, a lot of these compounds will create that leak in the tight junctions. And so you get leaky gut. That leads to general inflammation in the immune system sitting behind the gut lining. And then perhaps more disastrous, it leads to this disruption of the blood-brain barrier, and you get inflammation in the brain, and you get signaling deficits. And so you get sensory processing, insomnia, anxiety, major depression. Ultimately, you get the structural changes of dementia, Parkinson's, neurodegenerative conditions like that. So it's really a terrifying reality that what we've put into the food and water is really affecting a global injury that is at the root of these inflammation epidemics.
So I can imagine. I mean, we're pretty clear about what happens when you have leaky gut. You know, the food comes out of the gut and the body attacks it like it's a foreign invader. It's not a good thing to have leaky gut. Our kids have skyrocketing allergies. And I can also imagine what happens when you have the blood-brain barrier breaking down and toxins able to get into the brain that might not normally be able to get into the brain, such as, you know, formaldehyde, off-gassing from cabinets, or fire retardants on our pajamas or our sofas, or toxins in vaccines, or PCBs from plastic, all of those being able to permeate the blood-brain barrier and get into the brain. I understand that these are very, very toxic to our children and contributing to the toxic burden. But you mentioned the blood vessel wall linings. What could happen to people if the blood vessel wall lining, you know, I guess, do you still call those tight junctures, are breaking down or being damaged? What could happen in the body if that happens?
Yeah. So the blood vessel tight junction is lining every capillary, every tiny little supply chain to your body. And so these supply chains, as they start to leak, they lose regulatory function. They can no longer be that intelligent membrane between the blood and the cells that lie behind or are being fed by that capillary bloodstream. And so as you develop leak to the tight junction system, you can see everything from just general accumulation of acid, which is going to give you an increased rate of osteoporosis, loss of bone mineral density, increased rate of joint disorder, arthritis, etc. Osteoarthritis may be the best example of chronic acidification of the body. And so you get this general acid thing going on over and over again. And so
very interesting. Sorry to cut you off, but my naturopath is always telling me that my children and our guts are very acidic. And I was diagnosed with borderline osteoporosis when I was 39. I mean, that just doesn't seem normal.
Unfortunately, becoming normal now. And so what we used to see as a disease process in our 50s and 60s, we now typically see in our 30s. And that is absolutely from this acceleration of the acidification of the body, which is vascular leak in the end. And you add vascular leak to the kidney, now you have a second problem, which is the kidney is basically a huge tangle or organization of tiny little capillary bundles. And as they start to leak, you get the inability to clear toxin. The kidneys are one of your main mechanisms of toxin clearance. And so as you lose that healthy membrane in the kidney, not only are you accumulating toxin through the leaky gut, you can't get the toxin out as effectively because your kidneys are no longer filtering as they should. And so it's a 1-2 punch of more toxin, less ability to clear it, that's happening in this global tight junction injury. And as the acidification happens, ironically or sadly, the tissue actually becomes a magnet for a lot of the toxins that you mentioned. So plastics, drug residues, heavy metals, all of those are actually more likely to accumulate in acidic areas. And so you create a global injury that leads to leak, then you create a sponge for toxin, and then you damage the end kidney that can't clear the toxin. And so an autistic kid is simply this in a nutshell. It is a human being that has become a magnet for all things toxic and then can't get those toxins out of the body. And if it's any solace to any of you listening, I think, you know, Zen and Moms Across America is really the outpouring of efficacy of mothers. You guys are all on this intense pursuit of truth and meaningful answers, and it's because of you and because of your children and their journey that I think the industry is finally going to change. We're extremely blessed and excited to have Restore and bring that out, but we know that ultimately the science that we've brought forth and discovered isn't about selling a product, it's about changing an industry. And you know, if we can stop the legislation that is allowing this to increase in our food chain every year, the EPA has literally been ratcheting up with the allowables every 5 years. Our biggest single increase was the last one in 2013 that got snuck through. So it's an unbelievable legislative environment that's allowing this constant issue to go. So not only, you know, we just feel like our science is just pieces of in your arsenal as Moms Across America to really create this systemic change. And we couldn't be more excited and honored to be alongside you guys.